The phone call was the sound of a guillotine sliding into place. Isaiah stood with his back pressed against the cool plaster of the hallway, listening. He didn't need to understand the frantic, clipped words to know their meaning. He had rehearsed this exact scenario in his mind 1,000 times, a phantom dread that shadowed his every waking moment as a black man, a single father, in a world that wasn't built to give him the benefit of the doubt. The woman's voice, raw with a cocktail of morning-after confusion and genuine terror, came through the thin bedroom door. Her name was Elizabeth Vance. She was the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development for the corporate foundation that partially funded his community center. She was also, at this moment, in his daughter's bed. "Claire, listen to me," she whispered, the words sharp and panicked. "I don't know where I am. I woke up in someone's house. A man's house." A pause. Isaiah held his breath, the air in his lungs turning to stone. He could picture the scene on the other end of the line. Claire, her friend, probably a lawyer, mind already leaping to the darkest conclusions, feeding the fear. "I'm wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. They're not mine." Another longer pause. "I don't remember anything after the bar. Nothing." Isaiah closed his eyes. It didn't matter that he had slept on the lumpy, too-short couch in the living room, his long legs hanging uncomfortably over the armrest. It didn't matter that he had painstakingly removed her ridiculously expensive heels and placed them neatly by the door, or that he draped her silk dress over the back of a chair to prevent it from wrinkling further. It didn't matter that the clothes she was wearing were his late wife's, the softest, most comforting things he could find in the spare closet, chosen because they felt like an embrace. All that mattered were the optics, a powerful, wealthy white woman waking up in the modest Brooklyn apartment of the black man who ran a program she funded. It was a screenplay for a nightmare, and he was the unwilling star. He had only done the right thing. But the right thing, he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, could cost him everything. His job, his reputation, his daughter. He glanced at the closed door of his own bedroom, where 10-year-old Maya was still sleeping, blissfully unaware of the precipice on which their carefully constructed life was teetering. He had promised her. He had promised he would be in the front row for her spring concert tonight, the one where she had a solo on the violin. Keeping promises to Maya was the central pillar of his existence, the one non-negotiable law in the universe he had created for them after his wife, Michelle, had passed away. But as he listened to the terrified whispers from the other room, he felt that promise cracking under a weight he had never anticipated. The night before had been a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. The Foundation's annual Partners in Progress Gala was a necessary evil. It was an evening of performative appreciation, where community leaders like him were expected to mingle with the corporate benefactors, offering up heartwarming stories of urban renewal in exchange for another year of funding. Isaiah was good at it. He had learned to be. He could navigate the world of champagne flutes and quiet condescension with a practiced ease, making himself just visible enough to be remembered, but not so visible as to be a threat. He was a master of the non-committal nod, the agreeable murmur, the gentle deflection. It was a survival skill. He had seen Elizabeth Vance from across the ballroom. She was usually a picture of formidable composure, her posture perfect, her smile a finely calibrated instrument of corporate power. But last night, something was broken. He saw her check her phone, her face paling. He saw her hand tremble as she brought a glass of wine to her lips. Later, he saw her arguing in a hushed, vicious tone with a man in a tailored suit who looked at her with cold indifference before turning and walking away. Her armor had been breached. Isaiah had kept his distance. His internal alarm system, honed by years of experience, screamed at him to stay away. A distressed white woman in a position of power was a variable he could not afford to introduce into his life's delicate equation. He focused on his mission: secure a verbal commitment for the center's summer program, thank the right people, and get home to relieve his neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who was watching Maya. He was on his way out, shrugging into his coat in the lobby, when he saw her again. She was slumped on a velvet bench near the revolving doors, her head in her hands. The grand ballroom behind her was emptying out, the staff beginning to clear away the debris of manufactured goodwill. She looked up as he passed, her eyes unfocused and glassy. She had been drinking heavily. "Mr. Jones," she slurred, her voice thick. "Isaiah." He stopped. Every instinct told him to keep walking. Just nod, say good night, and disappear into the safety of the Brooklyn night. But then he saw the tear track cutting a clean path through her makeup. He saw the profound, unmoored loneliness in her eyes. It was a look he recognized. It was the look he saw in his own reflection in the dark hours of the morning when the grief for Michelle was a physical presence in the room. "Miss Vance," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Are you all right? Can I call you a car?" She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "A car to where?" He changed the locks. She gestured vaguely back toward the ballroom. "My husband, ex-husband. He just informed me, via text, that I lost the appeal. He gets the house. He gets everything." She started to cry then, not loudly, but with a silent, shuddering finality that was far more unnerving. She fumbled in her clutch. "My phone is dead. My wallet, I think I left it at the table." This was it, the moment of decision, the point of no return. He could call hotel security. They would handle it. They would be clinical, efficient, and entirely without compassion. They would see a drunk, hysterical woman and process her like a problem to be solved. Or he could help. He could treat her like a human being. He thought of Michelle. She had been a social worker, a fierce believer in the radical power of simple kindness. "Everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about," she used to say, her hand on his arm. "Be kind, always." It was the mantra she had lived by, the lesson she had tried to instill in him, a man the world had taught to be cautious above all else. "Okay," he heard himself say, the word feeling both foreign and inevitable. "Okay, Ms. Vance, let's figure this out." Getting her out of the hotel and into a cab was an ordeal. She was a dead weight, leaning heavily on him. He felt the stares of the doormen, the late-night travelers. He felt the familiar heat of scrutiny, the silent questions, the automatic assumptions. In the cab, she passed out against the window, murmuring something about her children. He didn't know where she lived, and even if he did, he couldn't take her to a home where the locks had been changed. Taking her to a hotel felt wrong, leaving her alone in her state. The only place he could think of, the only sanctuary he had, was his own home. It was a terrible, reckless idea. It was also the only kind one. He paid the driver, half carrying her up the 2 flights of stairs to his apartment. Mrs. Patterson met him at the door, her kind, wrinkled face a mask of concern. She was a rock, his surrogate grandmother and Maya's, the one person besides Michelle he had ever truly let in. "Oh, Lord Isaiah," she'd whispered, taking in the scene. "What happened?" "It's a long story, Mrs. P," he'd said, his voice strained with effort. "She's my boss, sort of. She's had a bad night." Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, didn't ask any more questions. She simply helped him guide Elizabeth toward the spare room, which was really Maya's room. They had swapped a year ago when Maya had decided she wanted the room with the view of the big oak tree in the courtyard. Isaiah had moved her little desk and her bookshelf into the larger room and taken the smaller one for himself. So, the spare room was filled with the gentle, innocent essence of his daughter. Star-shaped glow-in-the-dark stickers on the ceiling, a row of well-loved stuffed animals on the bed, a drawing of a unicorn taped to the wall. He and Mrs. Patterson had managed to get her onto the bed. He diverted his eyes as Mrs. Patterson gently removed her tight dress and found a clean t-shirt and sweatpants. Michelle's in the closet. She can't sleep in that thing, Mrs. Patterson had declared. No one can rest easy in armor. After Mrs. Patterson had left, assuring him she'd be back in the morning to help with Maya if needed, Isaiah had stood in the doorway of his daughter's room. Elizabeth Vance was curled on her side, surrounded by a unicorn comforter and a small army of plush toys. She looked impossibly small and vulnerable, stripped of her power suit and her corporate title. He had written a quick, clear note on a piece of paper and left it on the nightstand, along with a bottle of water and 2 aspirin. Ms. Vance, you were unwell last night. You are in my apartment. My name is Isaiah Jones. My daughter and I live here. You are safe. I'm in the living room if you need anything. He then retreated to the couch, where he'd spent the night wrestling with the potential consequences of his compassion. Now, listening to her terrified call, it seemed his worst fears were being realized. The note on the nightstand had clearly gone unread. The kindness was being rewritten as a threat. "Claire, what do I do?" Elizabeth's voice cracked. "Should I call the police?" Isaiah's blood ran cold. The police. The word alone was a death sentence to a situation like this. He could already see the headlines, the whispers in the foundation, the questions from Child Protective Services. Community leader in compromising situation with female executive. It wouldn't matter that he was innocent. The accusation itself was the conviction. He pushed himself off the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to get ahead of this. He had to de-escalate it before it spiraled into a catastrophe from which he could never recover. He walked softly to the bedroom door and knocked gently. Once, twice. The whispering inside stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, a small, fearful, "Who is it?" "It's Isaiah Jones, Miss Vance," he said, keeping his voice as low and calm as he could manage. I made some coffee. When you're ready." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked back to the kitchen, his movements stiff and deliberate. He felt like he was walking on a frozen lake, the ice groaning beneath his feet. He measured out the coffee grounds, his hands surprisingly steady. He filled the kettle. He focused on the small, mundane tasks, a litany against the rising panic. Make coffee, set out a mug, find the sugar, breathe. A few minutes later, the bedroom door creaked open. He heard her hesitant footsteps in the hall. He didn't turn around. He just stood at the counter, his back to her, listening to the drip of the coffee maker. "Where am I?" she asked. Her voice was stronger now, but brittle. "You're in my apartment, in Brooklyn," he said, still not turning. He knew what she would see if he did, a large black man in her immediate space. He was trying to make himself smaller, less threatening, an impossible task for a man who stood 6'3". You had a difficult night. I brought you here to make sure you were safe." "Safe?" The word was laced with suspicion. "I woke up in a strange bed, in clothes I've never seen before. I don't know you." "We met last night, at the gala," he said simply. "My name is Isaiah Jones. I run the Northwood Community Center. You don't remember?" He heard a rustle of fabric. He imagined her clutching the borrowed T-shirt, pulling it tighter around herself. "I remember the gala. I remember an argument, then nothing." This was the crucial moment. He finally turned slowly, keeping his hands visible, resting them on the counter. He looked at her. Her hair was a mess, her face pale and puffy from crying and sleep. The oversized T-shirt, one of Michelle's favorites, with a faded print of the Eiffel Tower on it, hung loosely on her frame. She looked lost. "Your ex-husband," Isaiah said softly. "He told you about the custody appeal. You were very upset. You couldn't find your wallet or your phone, and the locks on your home had been changed. You had nowhere to go." Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, searched his face, looking for a crack in his story, a hint of deception. He met her gaze steadily, holding nothing back. He was terrified, but he would not let her see it. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him squirm. His dignity was the only armor he had left. "So, you just decided to bring me here?" she asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. "To your apartment." "It seemed like the kindest option," he said. The words felt inadequate, flimsy against the wall of her fear. Suddenly, a new voice piped up from the hallway, small and clear as a bell. "Daddy, is that the sad lady?" Isaiah's heart seized. Maya. She was standing in the doorway of his bedroom, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, her hair a wild halo around her head. She was holding a worn-out stuffed elephant by one ear. She looked from Isaiah to Elizabeth, her brown eyes wide with curiosity, not fear. Elizabeth froze, her gaze snapping to the small child. Her entire posture shifted. The suspicion in her eyes flickered, replaced by a wave of complex emotions. Shock, confusion, and something else, something softer. "Maya, sweetie, go back to bed," Isaiah said, his voice gentle but firm. But Maya didn't move. She took a few steps into the kitchen, her bare feet making no sound on the linoleum. She looked at Elizabeth, tilting her head. "Your eyes are still sad," she said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "But you're wearing Mommy's shirt. That's her Paris shirt. She said it was for happy memories." The room fell silent. The air crackled with the weight of the child's innocent, devastating words. Elizabeth stared at the faded image on her chest, as if seeing it for the first time. A happy memory. She looked back at Maya, then at Isaiah, and for the first time since she'd woken up, the terror in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. The narrative she and Claire had been co-writing over the phone was beginning to fall apart, and in its place, a different, more complicated story was starting to take shape. And Isaiah knew, with a sinking feeling, that the day and the choices it would demand had only just begun. The concert was at 7 o'clock. It was already 8 in the morning. The clock was ticking. Elizabeth's hand went instinctively to the faded screen print of the Eiffel Tower on her chest. "Your mummy's shirt," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The question wasn't directed at Isaiah, but at the small girl with the impossibly old eyes who stood before her. Maya nodded solemnly. "She went there with Daddy a long, long time ago, before I was born. She said it was the most romantic place in the world. She bought that shirt so she would never forget how it felt to be happy and in love." Maya looked up at Isaiah, a shadow of her mother's smile gracing her lips. "Right, Daddy?" Isaiah felt a familiar pang in his chest, a bittersweet ache that was a constant companion. "That's right, sweetie," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat. "Maya, why don't you go get dressed for school?" "Mrs. Patterson will be here soon to walk you." "Okay." Maya gave Elizabeth one last, lingering look. "I hope your eyes feel happy again soon," she said, then padded out of the kitchen, her stuffed elephant dragging behind her. The silence she left behind was profound. It was filled with everything that hadn't been said. Elizabeth sank into one of the simple wooden chairs at the small kitchen table, her bravado completely gone. She looked at the worn linoleum floor, at the child's drawing of a smiling sun held to the refrigerator by a magnet, at the chipped mug Isaiah had set out for her. This wasn't a predator's lair. It was a home filled with love and loss and the quiet, daily effort of carrying on. I have children," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling. "2 boys. They're with their father, my ex-husband. He's trying to prove I'm an unfit mother." She looked up at Isaiah, her blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. "If he found out about this, if anyone found out—" "Nothing happened, Ms. Vance," Isaiah said, his voice firm but gentle. He finally poured her a coffee and placed it on the table in front of her. "You were in distress. I helped you. That's the entire story." She stared into the black coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. My friend, Claire, she's a lawyer. She said I should call the police. She said. Elizabeth trailed off, the shame evident on her face. She couldn't bring herself to repeat the assumptions, the vile accusations her friend had planted in her mind. I know what she said, Isaiah said quietly. He didn't need to hear it. He had heard variations of it his whole life. It was the background radiation of his existence. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, not as a defense, but to keep himself contained, to stop his hands from shaking. Miss Vance, do I look like a man who has the luxury of making mistakes? The question hung in the air between them. It was direct, unvarnished, and utterly true. She looked at him then, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes. She saw the quiet dignity in his posture. She saw the profound, weary patience of a man who had to explain his own humanity far too often. No, she said, her voice cracking. No, you don't. At that moment, her phone, which Isaiah had plugged in on the counter, buzzed to life. The screen lit up with a name. Claire. Elizabeth flinched, staring at the phone like it was a snake. You should probably answer that, Isaiah said, his voice devoid of judgment. Tell her you're all right. Elizabeth hesitated, then picked up the phone. Claire, she said, her voice low. She listened for a moment, her face tightening. No, don't. Do not call anyone. She turned her back to Isaiah, lowering her voice even further, as if for privacy. And then, she did something that shifted the very foundations of the room. She switched to French. Écoute, Claire, c'est plus compliqué que ça, she said, the language flowing from her with a practiced, fluid ease. Listen, Claire, it's more complicated than that. L'homme, il est ici. Il y a un enfant. The man, he's here. There's a child. Isaiah froze. He felt a cold fury, followed by a wave of profound weariness. Of course, the final, casual insult. The assumption that he was not only a potential predator, but also an uneducated one. That she could stand in his own kitchen, in his late wife's t-shirt, and speak about him in a language she assumed was a secret code, a wall between her world and his. He could feel her friend's panicked questions through the receiver, could imagine the narrative being spun. The black man, the vulnerable woman, the child used as a prop. Non, je ne pense pas qu'il soit une menace, Elisabeth continued, her back still to him. Mais je ne sais pas. Il a l'air trop calme. C'est suspect. No, I don't think he's a threat, but I don't know. He seems too calm. It's suspicious. Too calm. His carefully cultivated control, the only weapon he possessed against the world's prejudice, was being used as evidence against him. He felt a laugh, bitter and sharp, bubble up in his throat, but he choked it down. He would not give her that. Michelle had been from Montreal. Her mother was French, her father an American diplomat. French had been her first language, the language she spoke with her family, the language she whispered to him in the dark. She had tried to teach him patiently, laughing at his clumsy accent, and she had spoken it constantly to Maya when she was a baby, a river of soft melodic sounds that had been the soundtrack of their early family life. Isaiah was far from fluent, but he understood. Oh, he understood perfectly. He understood the nuance, the condescension, the casual dismissal. He thought of Maya's concert. It was at the Brooklyn Music School, a prestigious institution she had gotten into on a scholarship he had worked tirelessly to help her secure. Her solo was a piece by a French composer, Eric Satie. Gymnopédie No. 1. Michelle had loved that piece. Maya had chosen it for her. Tonight was supposed to be about them, about honoring Michelle's memory through her daughter's talent. Isaiah checked the clock on the microwave. 8:32 a.m. He needed to confirm details with the school, pick up his one good suit from the cleaners, prepare Maya's bag for her after-school practice. And he needed to deal with this. He needed to defuse this ticking bomb in his kitchen before it detonated and took his entire life with it. He made a choice. He was not going to be a passive character in her drama. He was not going to be a silent, scary prop. He pushed himself off the counter and walked over to the refrigerator. He opened it and took out the milk, his movements deliberate. He opened a cupboard and took down a box of cereal for Maya. He was claiming his space. He was a father in his kitchen, preparing breakfast for his child. This was his reality, and he would not let her fears overwrite it. Elizabeth fell silent on the phone, sensing his movement behind her. She turned slightly, the phone still pressed to her ear, watching him. He poured the cereal into a bowl, his back to her once more, and then, in a low, clear voice, he spoke. Ma femme disait toujours, he began, the French words feeling both strange and deeply familiar on his tongue. Que la gentillesse est une langue que même les sourds peuvent entendre, et les aveugles peuvent ne voir. My wife always used to say that kindness is a language that even the deaf can hear and the blind can see. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than any sound. He heard a sharp intake of breath from Elizabeth. On the other end of the phone, he could just make out Claire's voice, tinny and distant, asking what was happening. Isaiah didn't turn around. He just stood there, his hand resting on the cereal box, his heart pounding a furious, triumphant rhythm against his ribs. He had taken her weapon, her shield of privilege and assumption, and disarmed it with a memory, with a lesson from his daughter's mother. He had just laid his entire soul bare on the linoleum floor of his Brooklyn kitchen. Now, it was her turn to decide what to do with it. Elizabeth stood frozen, the phone feeling like a block of ice against her ear. The French words echoed in the small kitchen, not as an accusation, but as a quiet, profound statement of fact that completely dismantled her reality. He understood. He had understood everything. The condescension, the suspicion, the casual cruelty of her speaking about him as if he were a piece of furniture. A hot, deep shame washed over her, so potent it made her feel dizzy. Elizabeth, what was that? Who was that? Claire's voice crackled with urgency through the phone. Is someone else there? Are you okay? Elizabeth lowered the phone slowly, her eyes locked on Isaiah's back. He still hadn't turned around. He was giving her space, a courtesy she in no way deserved. The simple act of him pouring cereal for his daughter had become a monumental testament to his character. He wasn't a threat. He was a father. He was a grieving husband. He was a man who, despite having every reason to be angry and defensive, had chosen to respond with a quote about kindness. Claire, Elizabeth said, her own voice sounding foreign to her. It was stripped of its usual authority, its legalistic precision. It was small and hollow. I need to call you back. Don't you dare hang up on me, Elizabeth. What is going on? I'm fine, she said, and for the first time, she knew it was the truth. She was physically safe. The danger had never been in this apartment. The danger was in her own mind, in the paranoid world she and Claire had constructed out of fear and prejudice. I'm safe. I'll call you back. She ended the call, cutting off Claire's frantic protests. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a space for reflection, not suspicion. She looked around the kitchen again, but with new eyes. She saw the note she'd failed to read, still sitting on the nightstand in the other room, a silent testament to his decency. She saw the aspirins. She saw her expensive silk dress, not crumpled in a heap, but hanging carefully over a chair. She saw the worn, comfortable couch in the adjoining living room, a rumpled blanket, and a single pillow indicating where he had spent the night. The evidence had been there all along. She had just been too blind, too wrapped up in her own terror and privilege to see it. Isaiah finally turned around, His face was a mask of stoic calm, but she could see the storm in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something far more devastating. It was disappointment. "I apologize," she said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "That was inexcusable." "There is no excuse." He gave a slight, weary nod. "We all have our own languages we use to protect ourselves, Ms. Vance." He looked at the clock on the wall. 8:45 a.m. His jaw tightened. "I need to get my daughter ready for school." The mention of his daughter, of the ordinary rhythm of his life that she had so thoroughly disrupted, brought a fresh wave of shame. And then, a new, horrifying thought occurred to her. "Your daughter. Her concert. You mentioned a concert?" "Tonight," he said, his voice flat. "She has a solo." He didn't need to say anything more. They both knew the unspoken truth. This situation, her presence in his home, was a complication he would have to spend the rest of the day managing, a day that should have been reserved for celebrating his child. "I will leave," she said quickly, standing up. "I'll get my things. I'll call a car. I will be out of your way." "And where will you go?" he asked, the question practical, not accusatory. "Do you have your wallet, your keys?" She stopped. She didn't. She had nothing. She was completely adrift, a castaway in her own life. The full weight of her situation, separate from the manufactured drama of the morning, came crashing down on her. Her ex-husband had won. She had no home. Her children were with a man who was systematically poisoning them against her. She had gotten blackout drunk and woken up in a stranger's apartment, a stranger who had shown her more kindness than her own husband had in years. She stumbled back and sat down heavily in the chair, burying her face in her hands. The tears she had been holding back finally came, not the self-pitying tears of the night before, but ragged, wretched sobs of shame and grief. Isaiah watched her for a long moment. He could have walked away. He had every right to. He had done more than enough. He could have pointed her to the door and told her to figure it out. It would have been the logical, self-preservational thing to do. But Michelle's voice echoed in his head. "Be kind. Always." And he saw not Elizabeth Vance, the powerful SVP who held his center's funding in her hands, but a woman who was utterly broken. He let out a long, slow breath, the breath of a man making a sacrifice he knew he would pay for. He walked over to the table and sat down in the chair opposite her. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, a silent, steady presence in the wreckage of her mourning. He was giving her a moment to fall apart, a grace that no one had offered him when his own world had shattered. While she cried, Maya re-emerged from her room, fully dressed in her school uniform, her hair neatly brushed and tied back in 2 braids. She walked quietly into the kitchen, holding a piece of paper. She stopped when she saw Elizabeth crying, her brow furrowing with concern. She looked at her father. Isaiah gave her a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent instruction to leave it be. But Maya had a mind of her own, a heart that operated on a logic that adults had long forgotten. She walked over to the table and gently placed the piece of paper down next to Elizabeth's hand. Elizabeth's sobs subsided as she felt the small presence beside her. She looked up, her face tear-streaked and blotchy, and saw the drawing. It was a picture of a woman with bright yellow hair, standing under a rain cloud. But next to the woman, holding a big red umbrella over her head, was a little girl with 2 braids. Underneath the picture, in a child's careful, wobbly script, were 2 words: "It's okay." Elizabeth stared at the drawing, at the simple, profound act of empathy from a child she had, only an hour ago, viewed as a potential complication in a police report. She picked up the paper, her fingers trembling. Did you draw this for me?" she asked Maya. Maya nodded. "My mummy taught me that umbrellas don't just work for rain," she said softly. "They work for sadness too. You just have to find someone willing to hold it for you. That was it. That was the final blow to the fortress of Elizabeth's pride and fear. A child was teaching her a lesson she should have learned decades ago. A child was offering her an umbrella while she'd been busy accusing the girl's father of causing the storm. She looked at Isaiah, her eyes pleading. "How do I fix this?" she whispered. "What can I do?" Isaiah thought of the concert. He thought of the front row seat that would be empty if he spent his day untangling her life. He thought of Maya up on that stage, searching the crowd for his face and finding only a space. The sacrifice was immense. It felt like a betrayal of the most sacred promise he had ever made. But then he looked at the drawing in Elizabeth's hand. He looked at his daughter, standing there with her open, fearless heart. And he knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about Elizabeth Vance anymore. This was a lesson for Maya too. A lesson lived, not just spoken. You don't just talk about holding the umbrella. You hold it, even when it's heavy, even when it means you get wet. "First," Isaiah said, his voice regaining some of its strength, "you're going to have some breakfast. Then, we're going to make a plan. We're going to get your wallet and your phone from the hotel. We're going to find you a place to stay. And you are going to call your friend Claire back and tell her the truth. The whole truth." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And then, you're going to figure out how to fight for your kids." He stood up and turned to the stove. "Maya, honey, do you want oatmeal or cereal?" he asked, his voice a perfect imitation of normalcy. The choice was made. He was going to miss his daughter's concert. He was going to break his promise. He was sacrificing his perfect record as a father on the altar of a stranger's broken life. And as he scooped oatmeal into a pan, he felt a profound sense of loss. But also, underneath it, the quiet, unshakable conviction that he was doing exactly what Michelle would have wanted. He was being kind. Always. The morning unfolded in a surreal sequence of quiet efficiency. While Maya ate her oatmeal, chattering about her violin piece and the color of the dress she was going to wear, Isaiah and Elizabeth worked. He gave her a spare charging block for her phone, and she began making calls, her voice regaining its familiar executive crispness, but now tempered with a new humility. She arranged for a courier to retrieve her wallet from the lost and found at the hotel. She booked a suite at a long-term residence hotel. She spoke to her lawyer, not Claire, but a senior partner at her firm, explaining the situation with her ex-husband in calm, measured tones. The most difficult call was the one back to Claire. Isaiah didn't mean to listen, but the apartment was small. He was helping Maya pack her violin case, making sure her sheet music was flat, when he heard Elizabeth's voice from the living room. "Claire, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice steely. "You are to stand down. There will be no police report. There will be no investigation. Nothing happened." A pause. "No, you don't understand. I was wrong. I was scared. And I was wrong." Another pause. Longer this time. "He is a good man. He helped me. He and his daughter, they helped me. He sacrificed his own comfort and safety to make sure I was okay." Her voice dropped, thick with emotion. "He slept on the floor, Claire. He gave me his late wife's clothes because they were soft. His 10-year-old daughter drew me a picture because she thought I looked sad." Isaiah stopped what he was doing, his hand resting on the cool, polished wood of the violin case. He felt a weight he didn't even realize he was carrying begin to lift from his shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was simpler and more profound. It was the truth. She was telling the truth to the one person who could do him the most harm. Just then, the buzzer rang. It was Mrs. Patterson, right on time. He let her in, and she bustled into the kitchen, her warm presence instantly making the apartment feel more like home. Her eyes flickered to Elizabeth, who was now off the phone and standing awkwardly in the living room, then to Isaiah. Her gaze was questioning, but not judging. "Mrs. P, this is my boss, Miss Vance," Isaiah said. "She's had a bit of a crisis. She'll be leaving shortly." "I see," Mrs. Patterson said, her tone conveying a world of understanding. She turned to Maya. "Are you ready for the big day, Sweet Pea? Got your fiddler all tuned up?" "Yes," Maya beamed, grabbing her case. "Daddy's going to be in the front row." The words hit Isaiah like a physical blow. He knelt down, forcing a smile that felt brittle and fake. "About that, sweetie, something has come up. I might be a little bit late tonight." Maya's face fell. The light in her eyes dimmed. "Late? But you promised. You promised you'd be there for the beginning. For my solo." "I know, baby, I know. And I am going to try my absolute hardest to be there." "I promise I will try," he said, his heart splintering. It was a weak promise. A politician's promise. And they both knew it. He hated the words as soon as they left his mouth. "Trying isn't the same as doing," she said, her lower lip trembling. It was another one of Michelle's phrases, a gentle chiding she'd use when he'd procrastinate on fixing a leaky faucet. Hearing it from his daughter's lips was like a knife to the gut. Elizabeth, who had been watching the exchange from the doorway, stepped forward. "It's my fault," she said, her voice quiet. She knelt down to Maya's level, a gesture that seemed both foreign and deeply intentional for her. "Your dad is helping me with a very big, very grown-up problem. A problem I made. He's being a hero, and because of that he might be late. It's not fair, and I am so sorry." Maya looked from Elizabeth to her father, her young face a canvas of confusion and disappointment. She didn't say anything. She just hugged her dad tightly, burying her face in his shoulder. "Just try really hard, Daddy," she whispered. "I will," he whispered back, his eyes burning. "I love you more than anything." He watched as she and Mrs. Patterson left, the little violin case bumping against her leg. The door clicked shut, and the silence that filled the apartment was the sound of his own failure. He had broken the cardinal rule. He had let the outside world, with all its chaos and injustice, pierce the safe bubble he had created for his daughter. He straightened up, his shoulders slumping. He felt a decade older than he had that morning. "I am so sorry," Elizabeth said again, her hands twisting in front of her. "There has to be a way. I can call a car. I can handle this myself now." "No," Isaiah said, shaking his head. "If I leave you to it, you'll call Claire again, and she'll talk you into doing something stupid. Or your ex-husband will pull some other stunt, and you'll end up back at square one." He ran a hand over his face. "We're going to see this through. It's the only way to make sure it's truly over." He looked at her, his expression grim. "I can't afford any loose ends, Ms. Vance." The rest of the day was a blur. They took a cab to the hotel from the gala, a sterile, impersonal place that felt like another planet compared to his apartment. Isaiah stood back, a silent, imposing guardian, while Elizabeth, with a corporate credit card she'd had delivered, dealt with the staff. She retrieved her wallet and a spare key to her office. Her demeanor was all business, but Isaiah could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting her ex-husband to materialize from the shadows. From there, they went to her office, a sleek glass and steel tower in Midtown. He waited in the lobby, a space so grand and ostentatiously minimalist, it felt like a museum. People in expensive suits bustled past, their eyes sliding over him without seeing him. He was invisible again, a piece of the background. In this world, he was no one. It was a strange, jarring contrast to the life-or-death power he had seemingly held just hours before. Elizabeth returned with a small overnight bag and a laptop. She had changed into a tailored blazer and slacks, her armor back in place, but it didn't fit the same way. There were chinks in it now. He could see the vulnerability underneath. Finally, they took another cab to her new temporary residence. He insisted on going up with her, on seeing her settled in. He did a quick professional sweep of the suite, checking the locks on the doors and windows, making sure the phone worked. It was the kind of thing a security consultant would do. It was the kind of thing a father would do. When he was satisfied she was secure, he stood at the door, ready to leave. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city. He checked his watch. 6:15 p.m. The concert started at 7. The school was a 45-minute subway ride away, on a good day. There was no way he would make it for Maya's solo. The knowledge settled in his stomach like a lead weight. "Isaiah," Elizabeth said, stopping him before he could leave. "Thank you is not a big enough word." She opened her purse and took out her checkbook. "I want to compensate you for your time, and for your daughters, for the concert. I want to make a donation to the center, a significant one." Isaiah looked at the checkbook in her hand, and something inside him snapped. It wasn't anger, but a deep, profound wave of exhaustion. After everything they had been through, after the intimacy of the morning, the shared fear, the intervention of his daughter, she was still trying to make it a transaction. She was trying to write a check to absolve her guilt, to balance the ledger. "Put that away," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You don't get it, do you? After all of this, you still don't get it." She looked stung, confused. "I'm just trying to—" "You're trying to pay me off," he cut in. "You think you can write a check for my daughter's disappointment? You think you can put a price on the fact that I had to listen to you and your friend debate whether I was a criminal in my own home? You think your money fixes the fact that for the rest of my life, a part of me will be terrified that this day could come back to haunt me?" He took a step closer, his voice low and intense. "I don't want your money, Ms. Vance. I didn't help you for a donation. I helped you because you were a human being in pain. I missed my daughter's concert, the most important night of her year, not for a check, but because it was the right thing to do. My integrity is not for sale. My daughter's faith in me is not a commodity you can purchase." He was breathing heavily, the words pouring out of him, a dam of carefully controlled emotion, finally breaking. "What I want from you is not your money. I want you to understand. I want you to sit here in your safe, expensive hotel suite and understand what this day cost me. And I want you to remember it. I want you to remember that there are things in this world, dignity, kindness, a father's promise, that don't have a price tag." He turned and walked out, not waiting for her reply. He didn't slam the door. He closed it softly behind him, a gesture of finality that was more powerful than any sound. He rode the elevator down in a daze, his own words ringing in his ears. He walked out into the cool evening air and started heading for the subway, his long strides eating up the pavement. He was a man racing against a clock that had already run out, a father trying to keep a promise he had already broken. He made it to the Brooklyn Music School at 7:48 p.m. The lobby was empty, save for a lone security guard. Muffled applause echoed from behind the heavy wooden doors of the auditorium. He had missed it. He had missed it all. He slumped onto a bench, the fight draining out of him completely. He dropped his head into his hands, the image of Maya's disappointed face burning in his mind. He had failed her. In his effort to be a good man, he had failed at being a good father. The irony was crushing. A few minutes later, the auditorium doors opened and Mrs. Patterson came out, her face a mixture of sympathy and pride. She was holding her phone. "Isaiah," she said softly, sitting down next to him. "You just missed it. She was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful." "I know," he whispered, unable to look at her. "She was looking for you," Mrs. Patterson continued gently. "But she did great." She held her head high. "That child has a spine of steel, just like her mother." She held out her phone. "I recorded it. The whole thing." He took the phone, his hands trembling. He pressed play. The video was a little shaky, but the sound was clear. There was his daughter, standing alone in a pool of light on the big stage. She was wearing a deep blue velvet dress, her small violin tucked under her chin. She looked so small, so brave. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the dark audience for a moment, and then she began to play. The first haunting melancholic notes of Satie's Gymnopédie filled the air. The music was beautiful, achingly so. She played with a maturity that belied her years, each note infused with a profound sense of emotion. It wasn't just a performance. It was a prayer. It was a tribute. It was everything he and Michelle had ever hoped for her. And he had missed it. The tears he had been holding back all day finally fell, silent drops of grief and regret splashing onto the phone screen. The piece ended. The audience erupted in applause. Maya took a small, perfect bow. Then, just as Mrs. Patterson was about to stop recording, Maya stepped forward to the microphone. "Thank you," she said, her small voice amplified throughout the hall. "That piece was for my mum. She loved Paris." She paused, taking another breath. "And I want to dedicate this performance to my dad. He couldn't be here at the beginning because he was busy helping someone. He was holding an umbrella for them because they were sad." She looked directly into the camera, as if she knew he would be watching. "It's okay, Daddy. Mommy would be proud of you. I'm proud of you. I love you." Isaiah's breath hitched in his chest. A sob escaped him, a raw, ragged sound of overwhelming love and relief. He watched the clip again and then a third time. His daughter, his incredible, wise, forgiving daughter. She understood. She had seen his sacrifice not as a betrayal, but as an act of love. She had given him the one thing he didn't know how to give himself: grace. In his darkest moment of failure, his child had reached through the screen and saved him. He sat there on the bench in the empty lobby, the applause from the phone a distant echo, and he cried. He cried for his wife, for his daughter, for the crushing weight he carried every day, and for the beautiful, unexpected moment of redemption that had just been handed to him by a 10-year-old girl with a violin and a heart as big as the city itself. The days that followed were quiet. Isaiah threw himself back into his work at the Northwood Community Center. The familiar rhythm of grant proposals, youth counseling sessions, and budget meetings a welcome anchor. He and Maya fell back into their routine. Homework at the kitchen table, walks in the park, late-night talks about everything and nothing. He didn't tell her the full details of what had happened with Elizabeth Vance, only that a person had been in trouble and he had helped. Maya seemed to accept this without question. Her performance and her message to him had become a sacred, unspoken understanding between them. She had seen his character, and that was enough. He didn't hear from Elizabeth. A part of him was relieved. He had said his piece, and the silence felt like a tacit acknowledgement of his words. He didn't want her apology or her money. He just wanted to be left alone, to retreat back into the carefully managed invisibility he had cultivated for so long. But about a week later, his assistant buzzed his office. "Isaiah, there's an Elizabeth Vance here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment." Isaiah's stomach tightened. He hesitated, then said, "Send her in." Elizabeth walked into his small, cluttered office. She wasn't wearing her corporate armor. She was dressed in simple slacks and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore little makeup. She looked less like a senior vice president and more like a person. She was holding a large, flat gift bag. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she began, her voice soft. "And I know what you said about transactions. This isn't that." He remained seated behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Then what is it?" She walked forward and placed the gift bag on his desk. "It's for Maya," she said. She opened it and pulled out a framed object. It was Maya's drawing, the woman under the rain cloud, the little girl holding the red umbrella. It had been professionally framed, with a simple, elegant black border and a small brass plaque at the bottom. The plaque read, "Umbrellas work for sadness too. Maya Jones." Isaiah stared at it. He was speechless. "I wanted her to have it," Elizabeth continued, her voice thick with emotion. "And I wanted to have a copy for myself, to hang in my office, to remind me of what's important, to remind me to see people, really see them." She took a deep breath. "I also wanted to apologize, not with a check, with my words, face to face. What I did, how I acted, the assumptions I made, it was wrong. It was born of fear and privilege and a blindness I am only now beginning to recognize in myself. There is no excuse for it. And I am profoundly, deeply sorry for the fear I caused you and for the promise I made you break." Isaiah looked from the framed drawing to her face. He saw no artifice, no strategy. He saw genuine, painful remorse. He saw a woman who had been cracked open and was now trying to piece herself back together into something better. He slowly stood up. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of the entire week. It was an acceptance, an acknowledgement of her effort. "I took your words to heart," she said, meeting his gaze. "About presence over presence. About dignity, I've been thinking about it all week. My foundation, the one I work for. We write checks. We fly in for galas. We take pictures, and we fly out. We think we're helping, but we're not really present. We don't understand the communities we're funding." She gestured around his office, at the overflowing bookshelves, the pictures of kids from the program taped to the wall. "I want to change that, starting here. I'm not here today as a senior vice president. I'm just here as Elizabeth. I want to ask if I can volunteer. Not for a day, for a photo op. I want to come once a week. I can help with grant writing. I can tutor math. I can file papers. I want to be present. I want to learn." Isaiah was taken aback. This was the last thing he had expected. A wealthy executive offering to do administrative work. It was a gesture of such profound humility that it disarmed him completely. He thought about it for a long moment. His first instinct, the old cautious Isaiah, was to say no, to keep his world separate, to protect his sanctuary from this woman who represented a world that had almost destroyed him. But then he thought of Maya. He thought of her unconditional forgiveness. He thought of Michelle, who believed in second chances, who believed that people could grow and change. To refuse this offer would be to betray their shared philosophy. It would be to give in to the very fear he was trying to teach his daughter to overcome. "We have a tutoring session for our high schoolers on Wednesdays," he said, his voice even. "They need help with algebra. It's from 4 to 6. A slow, genuine smile spread across Elizabeth's face. It was the first time he had seen her smile with her eyes. "I'll be here," she said. "Thank you, Isaiah." And she was. The next Wednesday, she showed up at 3:55 p.m., dressed in jeans and a simple blouse. The kids were wary of her at first. They saw the expensive watch on her wrist, the practiced confidence in her posture. They saw her as an outsider, but Elizabeth didn't flinch. She sat down at a table with a tough 16-year-old named Marcus, who was failing geometry, and said, "Okay, Marcus, I hear you're having trouble with proofs. Me too. Let's figure it out together." Isaiah watched from his office doorway as she patiently, humbly, worked through problems with him. She didn't talk down to him. She listened. She admitted when she didn't know an answer and looked it up with him. By the end of the 2 hours, Marcus was explaining a theorem to her, and for the first time in months, he looked proud. Elizabeth became a regular fixture at the center. Every Wednesday, she was there. She learned the kids' names. She learned about their lives, their struggles, their dreams. She never mentioned her title or her wealth. She was just Elizabeth, the lady who was surprisingly good at quadratic equations. The kids started to open up to her. They started to trust her. she and Isaiah developed a new kind of relationship. It wasn't quite friendship, not yet. It was something quieter, more profound. It was a partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect. They talked, sometimes after the tutoring sessions were over. She told him about her custody battle. She was fighting differently now, with less anger and more strategy, focusing on demonstrating her stability and her commitment. He told her about Michelle, about his dreams for the center, about the constant, low-grade fear of raising a black daughter in a world that would not always be kind. One evening, a few months later, she stayed late to help him draft a complex grant proposal for a new arts program. They worked side by side at the large table in the main room, surrounded by the comfortable quiet of the empty center. "You know," she said, looking up from her laptop, "I never understood what you meant that day. In your kitchen, when you asked if you looked like a man who could afford to make mistakes. I think I'm starting to understand now." He looked at her. "What do you understand?" "The margin for error," she said softly. "I've lived my whole life with an enormous margin for error. I could make a mistake, a terrible one, and my money, my lawyers, my status, they were a safety net. I could fail and fall and get back up. That night I met you, I failed spectacularly. And you were my safety net." She shook her head, a look of wonder on her face. "You have no net. Your character is your net, your integrity. It has to be perfect, because you know if you fall, the ground is a long way down." Isaiah felt a lump form in his throat. She had seen him. In that moment, she had seen the invisible architecture of his entire life. It was a moment of connection so deep, so real, it transcended race and class and all the other barriers that separated their worlds. "Yeah," he said, his voice husky. "That's about the size of it." The grant was approved. It was the largest the center had ever received. The Foundation's board, influenced by Elizabeth's passionate, first-hand account of the center's work, had voted unanimously not only to fund the arts program, but to increase their overall contribution by 50%. It wasn't charity, it was an investment. The story could have ended there. But a year after that terrible night, there was another spring concert at the Brooklyn Music School. Isaiah was there an hour early. He saved 3 seats in the front row. He sat in the middle one. A few minutes before the concert started, Elizabeth slipped into the seat on his left. She was coming straight from a late meeting, still in her work clothes, but she was there. A few moments later, Mrs. Patterson arrived and took the seat on his right. The lights dimmed. Maya walked out onto the stage. She was a year older, a year taller. Her confidence was radiant. She was playing a different piece this time, something joyful and complex. Before she began, she stepped to the microphone. She smiled, and her eyes found the front row. She looked at Mrs. Patterson. She looked at Elizabeth. And then she looked at her father. "This is for my team," she said simply. Then she raised her violin and began to play. The music soared through the auditorium, a symphony of resilience, forgiveness, and hope. Isaiah sat in the dark, his heart full. For years he had lived his life trying to be invisible, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to never give anyone a reason to question his character. But that one night, he had made a different choice, a dangerous choice. He had stepped out of the shadows and into the storm. And somehow, against all odds, it had led him here, to this moment of profound, shared grace. Maybe the world wasn't fair. Maybe it never would be. But as he listened to his daughter's music, flanked by the 2 women who had, in their own ways, become his family, he realized that he was no longer invisible. He was seen. He was known. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe that was everything.